Thanks to Brilliant for sponsoring this video. More on that later. While we research the various topics that we bring you on a weekly basis, we come across a lot of very unusual events, some of which have tragic endings. And while this certainly is not the focus of this channel, some of these events are almost too incredible to believe. Today, we're diving into 5 of the most horrifying ways that people have died in freak accidents. And trust me, it's not pretty. We'll break down exactly what happens to the body when these disasters unfold, from bone-crushing impacts to life-ending mistakes. It's not just about the stories, it's about how the human body handles, or doesn't handle, these extreme situations. Imagine being stuck in a cave, unable to move or get out, knowing that rescuers are trying their best, but it just might not be enough. That's exactly what happened to John Jones in 2009 when he found himself wedged in a narrow passage in the Nutty Putty Cave in Utah. We're gonna get some insights from storyteller Abstract for this one.
Be warned, this is not a story for those with claustrophobia.
And rightly so. This case became one of the most tragic in cave rescue history. Nutty Putty Cave, considered a beginner cave, had tight, slippery passages and sharp turns that made it dangerous. Some experts have called it a ticking time bomb, while others argued it wasn't fair to shut it down. John, however, wasn't a newbie. He'd grown up exploring caves.
In fact, as a small boy, John had more than once acted as a trapped victim for the Utah Cave Rescue Team.
Talk about eerie foreshadowing. Unfortunately, this day wouldn't be a drill. On November 24th, 2009, John and his brother Josh decided to explore a narrow passage called the Birth Canal, a tight, twisting tunnel. But it wasn't the tightness that would seal John's fate.
So what we're looking for is the birth canal. Should be around here somewhere.
John wriggled on just his stomach down what he thought was the entrance to the birth canal, but John had taken a wrong turn down an unmapped passageway via a route known as the corkscrew.
Only for the smallest and most flexible explorers, John's body had to contort, his shoulder and ribs twisting in ways they weren't meant to. He couldn't turn back. As he squeezed through, he thought he saw an opening, only to fall head first into a tiny fissure, just 10 inches by 18 inches. So he was trapped with no wiggle room. His arms pinned to both sides, completely upside down. Oh my God. Well, the human body isn't meant to be in such a restricted position, nor is it meant to be upside down for extended periods of time. With his heart working overtime and gravity fighting against him, the lack of blood flow and oxygen put John at serious risk of cardiac arrest. Meanwhile, his brother went for help, and rescuers quickly set up a pulley system. But breaking through the tough rock was slow, and even when they made progress, debris kept falling back onto John. Time was running out, and the trauma surgeon predicted organ failure in only 10 hours.
Each trip to pass a piece of gear to John's location, 700 feet deep within the cave, took an hour, and only one person could ascend or descend down the passageway at a time.
You can't survive that long. Blood has to pump backwards, circulation slows, capillaries leak. Things start to fail pretty quickly.
Within the first hour, a rescuer heard a distinct rattling sound coming from John's chest, a sign that fluid was building up in his lungs and he was starting to struggle with asphyxiation.
The rescue team decided that the immediate goal should be to get John out of his dangerous position to alleviate the pressure on his lungs.
But again, getting John's bones to bend for extraction was nearly impossible. It's joints, not bones, that allow for bending, but only in certain directions. In his position, his legs and feet couldn't navigate the sharp turns, and the rock lip he'd squeezed over was catching on his chest.
The team managed to hoist him up enough to elevate his position slightly and administer IV.
So they were likely giving him fluids to maintain hydration, stabilize blood pressure, and prevent shock. Meanwhile, John swung between calm and panic, as anyone would. In situations like this, the fight or flight response kicks in. But John could do neither. Adrenaline sped up his heart rate, worsening his condition as his body needed calm to conserve energy. Rescuers even brought a radio so he could speak to his wife to ease his anxiety. After a stressful 19 hours, a second pulley system was ready.
Each pull was agonizing for John, and the team had to pause several times to avoid breaking his legs.
After 3 pulls, John was raised just enough to make eye contact with the rescuer. In pain, but still smiling, he tried to stay positive. But just when it seemed like they might get him out, the pulley system failed again, sending John sliding back down. To make matters worse, a bolt securing the system came loose, causing part of the wall to collapse. The debris hit the rescuer, knocking him out.
John had slid back down into the crevice and had now become completely unresponsive.
Things quickly spiraled. The lead rescuer needed help, so another took over. But even though John was still breathing, the rescuer themselves became stuck and injured. Talk about adding fuel to the fire. A final attempt to drill around John was made, but everyone was too exhausted to continue. A paramedic confirmed John still had a pulse, but was pronounced dead 28 hours after becoming stuck. The team determined it was too dangerous to remove his body, so they sealed the cave entrance with concrete, leaving him inside. John's case is a stark reminder that accidents can happen anywhere, even with the best safety measures in place. Some happen during risky adventures when people aren't fully considering the dangers, while others occur in regulated environments where safety is a priority, like the workplace. On the Dr. Chris channel, we strive to teach all of you interns about human anatomy in an engaging way. But when you are not watching my videos, there are other fantastic ways for you to learn about science and math, like the sponsor of this video, Brilliant. Brilliant is an online education service dedicated to teaching you about science, technology, engineering, and math in a fun and engaging, interactive manner. And it is one of the most effective ways to learn about these topics. Computer science was always an area of interest for me, and with lessons covering coding at a variety of levels, whether it's about thinking in code, creative coding, or coding applied to language models like ChatGPT, Brilliant can help you understand how to apply coding to solve everyday problems in everyday life. And with lessons available on desktop or on your mobile device, you can learn at any time, no matter where you are, making it easy to establish a daily learning habit. With engaging lessons crafted by teachers, researchers, and professionals from MIT, Caltech, Duke, Microsoft, Google, among others, you have access to an award-winning content that uses a unique first principles approach to effectively develop critical thinking skills. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days and get 20% off an annual premium subscription, visit brilliant.org/Dr. Chris Raynor or scan the QR code on screen. The link is also in the description. Some jobs are inherently risky, while others are downright dangerous. Saturation diving is a prime example. A high-stakes form of deep-sea construction where you're fixing equipment or laying cables in a bulky suit with zero visibility and a swirling seafloor. The deeper you go, the more dangerous it becomes due to pressure, and your body absorbs gases like nitrogen, which can then cause serious issues if you ascend too quickly. Ever heard of the bends? YouTube investigator Joe Scott compares it to opening a bottle of soda.
CO2 is added at high pressure, and it causes that to saturate into the water. Just like being underwater at high pressure causes gases to saturate into your blood. It's the same idea.
Release pressure too quickly, and bubbles form. Definitely not something you want in your blood vessels. The trick is to ascend slowly, like twisting a soda cap to prevent bubbles. But in this business, time is money. To speed things up, workers live in a pressurized chamber on the surface for weeks, staying pressurized while taking turns descending into a diving bell to work on the ocean floor.
After their shift is over, they go back up in the diving bell, dock the diving bell to the pressurized living quarters, and then do what they call a TUP, or a transfer under pressure, into the living quarters.
When people say someone works well under pressure, saturation divers are the real freaking deal. Scott explains they work in environments with pressures between 1 and 19 atmospheres. For comparison, planes at 8,000 feet are pressurized at 0.75 atmospheres. The ear popping you'll feel is due to a 1/4 atmosphere difference. Divers face 25 times that pressure, making it one of the most extreme jobs on Earth. On November 5th, 1983, a 4-person team, Edwin Coward, Roy Lucas, Bjorn Bergeson, and Trull Hellevick, were working at a depth requiring 9 atmospheres. After their shift, they returned to the surface and docked their diving bell to the trunk, which, as Scott explains, is like a space travel airlock. a sealed tunnel that gets pressurized, allowing safe movement from the diving bell to the main chamber. But it was here in this crucial moment that disaster struck.
But just before the hatch was fully closed, one of the dive tenders opened the clamp to free the tunnel from the diving bell.
As Scott puts it, the 80,000-pound diving bell slammed into the dive tenders, William Kremen and Martin Saunders, with the force of a semi-truck at full freaking speed.
If you've ever had a balloon that's full of air and then let go and watched it take off like into the sky, that is what would happen to the diving bell, only this isn't a balloon, it's an 8,000-pound piece of metal.
Kremen died on the way to the hospital, while Saunders, though badly injured with a broken back and neck, somehow survived. For the rest of the crew, Bergeson, Coward, and Lucas, death was instant. They didn't just stop breathing though. What may have looked like that from the outside was actually a much more horrifying scene inside their bodies. What can only be described as a violent physiologic shutdown.
Because instantaneously, nitrogen and other gases just surged out of their blood and tissues like a Mentos and Diet Coke.
Warning, plug your ears if you're squeamish. Blood literally boiled inside them, and with all the bubbles, circulation became impossible, cutting off oxygen and nutrients to vital organs. And organ failure equals no more bodily functioning. Scott points out that there wouldn't even be a chance to panic because your brain is boiling too.
Well, we got a long time in this decompression chamber. You guys mind if I turn on the radio?
Essentially, it would be a sudden, irreversible kind of neurological shutdown. The autopsy revealed something chilling. Lipids and fats within the body had solidified.
In the cardiac chambers and the great vessels around the heart, both arteries and veins, large amounts of free fats were found. This fat was mixed with gas bubbles and looked like sizzling butter in a frying pan.
And while that's already gruesome, what made this even more unforgettable was what happened to the fourth diver, Helveg. He was closing the hatch when the pressure change hit, but there was still a small gap, just enough for him to be in the wrong place. The same force that sent the diving bell flying, well, it launched Helveg like a cannon.
And the pressure then pushed through his body, sending his abdominal organs flying through the hole.
The extreme pressure differential caused by the gap made Helveg's body react more violently than the others. In an instant, it was like an explosion of body parts. As extreme as this sounds, the human body faces similar forces in other deadly environments, like the peak of Mount Everest. While the ocean's pressure is crushing, Everest's thin air and freezing cold create their own suffocating force. Climbing Everest is one of the toughest human feats, but it comes at a cost. The body can only endure so much without oxygen, and in freezing temperatures too, I might add. Many climbers don't survive, and remain there, frozen in ice and time, as dark docu-channel Lens Eclipse describes.
Mount Everest has earned the moniker of the open graveyard waiting above.
Some climbers have even died trying to recover the bodies of fallen comrades. The extreme cold acts like a natural preservative, slowing cellular processes and preventing decomposition, turning them into chilling landmarks. One of the most famous is Hannelore Schmatz, the first German woman to die on Everest. Her body still stands visible on the southern route, a haunting reminder of the mountain's dangers, almost like a guard.
Yet it feels as if she follows me with her eyes as I pass by. Her presence reminds me that we are here on the conditions of the mountain.
Everest can reach up to, or more accurately, down to, minus 60 degrees C or 76 degrees Fahrenheit. In sub-zero temperatures, the body loses heat rapidly. Once core temperature drops below 35 C or 95 degrees Fahrenheit, hypothermia sets in, slowing vital functions and prioritizing heat for essential organs. Extremities like hands and feet begin to freeze, and eventually the core suffers. Once hypothermia takes hold, confusion, lethargy, and loss of motor control follow. Simple tasks like unclipping gear or even walking become impossible. For climbers like Schmatz, exhaustion and freezing temperatures led to her demise. She couldn't continue. Hypothermia and oxygen deprivation can be fatal within hours. Above 26,000 feet, the air is so thin that the body starts to shut down. In the death zone, oxygen levels are too low to sustain life, and climbers sometimes rest, but never get up again. That's what happened to David Sharp.
Frozen in a sitting position with his arms holding his legs, David died in the same cave as Green Boots.
Sharp's death was caused by hypoxia, oxygen deprivation. Without enough oxygen, the body can't function properly. The heart beats faster to compensate, but muscles become paralyzed and the brain struggles, leading to confusion, dizziness, and hallucinations.
If you cut yourself, you don't heal very well. If you get sick, you do not get better.
Movement and thought become impossible. What makes Sharp's death controversial is that many climbers passed by him, seemingly alive but unable to move or call for help. Fatigue and disorientation make it hard to assess one's condition, and climbers focused on the summit often overlook others in distress. With the margin of error between life and death being as small as it is, climbers often cannot risk helping others who are failing, as they might put themselves in a potentially lethal position. Supplemental oxygen is crucial in high altitude climbing, but many climbers choose to go without. Frances Arsentiev's tragic story highlights the dangers of this. The first American woman to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen, she collapsed on her descent when her body could no longer cope. By the time climbers found her the next morning, it was too late.
She was still alive but dying of hypothermia. She couldn't move and her consciousness was fading. She whispered, "Don't leave me."
So the thing about Everest casualties is this. Without enough oxygen, the body simply can't keep up. It's not about willpower. The body can simply shut down in extreme conditions. And while the environment on Everest is a harsh physical test, the challenges faced by people suffering from mental health issues can seem just as intense, especially in the early 20th century, when mental health was so misunderstood. No less brutal, just less visible. Those who didn't fit society's expectations were frequently locked away in asylums with no effective treatment. The prevailing solution? Patients were kept in small, locked rooms, often strapped into straitjackets and left with minimal care.
This is where straitjackets came in. People were often chained to walls and put in cages. And I don't mean jail cells, I mean like tiny cages the size of a dog crate for hours, even days at a time.
The goal of asylums wasn't treatment, but containment, managing overcrowding and protecting staff from violence. Unfortunately, these methods often worsened patients' conditions. Dr. Walter Freeman, inspired by Portuguese neurologist Egas Moniz, believed he could do better and championed the lobotomy, a controversial procedure where doctors sever brain connections. You see, the brain evolved from back to front, with the rear responsible for basic functionings like breathing and digestion. This helps explain why children's brains, particularly the areas controlling executive function, are still developing into adulthood. As the brain matures, white matter increases, forming more connections and pathways. White matter, made up of nerve fibers, help transmit signals between different brain regions, and it does so especially quickly due to their fatty coating called myelin. To help us understand white matter better, let's bring Joe back in for a helpful analogy.
You can think of it kind of like the cables coming out the back of a rack of servers, like each server is a different module.
The doctors figured instead of removing parts of the brain, they could just cut the communication cables. The lobotomy separated the emotional part of the brain, the primitive limbic system, from the frontal cortex, which handles reasoning and decision making, the more evolved part. As writer Sam Keane, who covered Freeman extensively, points out,
and the theory at the time, we now know it was incorrect, was that the emotional parts of the brain were getting revved up and they were overwhelming the frontal parts of the brain.
Experiments on chimps showed they became more complacent and had fewer tantrums after the procedure. The goal was to make people calmer and more compliant. Basically, less likely to have emotional outbursts and behavior problems that landed them in asylums. There were two main ways to perform lobotomies: transorbital and transcranial. The transcranial method was full brain surgery, done in a sterile environment with a neurosurgeon and an anesthesiologist.
Go in, they would cut a hole on both sides of the brain, and they would put basically a long metal shim in there. He would slide the ice pick right up on the inside of the eye, get it inside there, and start swishing it around.
Alternatively, the transorbital technique was less invasive and complicated and became Freeman's signature method.
And these used a syringe-like tool called a leucotome to pierce the brain, and then it did its business inside of the brain with a little wire loop.
As Scott says, this version of the procedure was easier for A few reasons.
It was kind of a brilliant procedure in a way, because the layer of bone at the back of the eye socket is much thinner than at the top of the skull. It's also a lot closer to that white matter that you have to sever, so you don't have to go through as much brain tissue. All you did was just knock it in and then wiggle it around once you got it in there, and the nerves are severed.
On top of that, the area behind the eye is closer to white matter, meaning less brain tissue to go through and no visible scars, which Freeman found convenient. Always looking to speed things up, he became so efficient that he could perform up to 25 lobotomies in a single day. He even earned the nickname the Ice Pick Surgeon for his showmanship, sometimes performing two lobotomies at once, one with each hand.
So he developed essentially a mass production way of doing this. It was sort of a jiffy lube lobotomy.
He even took his procedure on the road, offering lobotomies at rural asylums across the country. People would line up, eager for the operation.
And he did it in a modified van that he called, and I am not making this up, the Lobotomobile.
Freeman's ambition knew no bounds. He performed lobotomies on adolescents, children, and even those without clear indications for the procedure. Just about anybody. You get a lobotomy, you get a lobotomy, everybody gets lobotomies. He believed that by intervening early, he could nip it in the bud, so to speak.
Let's prevent them from even getting into an asylum and perform it preemptively.
This was not only unethical, but also dangerous. Many patients who were temporarily in asylums and eventually recovered were permanently damaged by the procedure. Some lost their ability to speak, care for themselves, or interact meaningfully with others, slipping into a vegetative state. One of the most famous cases was Rosemary Kennedy, the sister of President John F. Kennedy. Despite being a lively young woman, her family worried her behavior was too erratic. In 1941, at the age of 23, she was lobotomized without her family's consent, leaving her severely incapacitated.
He said they lost their sparkle. So they essentially lost their personality. So they might just be sitting in a room all day, staring at the wall.
Now, if you think the lobotomy procedure itself sounds imprecise, consider that Freeman's technique was often carelessly executed.
He had the ice pick in the person's brain and stopped to take a picture, and it was at a bad angle and actually slid down to their midbrain.
You know, just the part controlling breathing and wake-sleep cycles. Might be important, I guess. Despite the mistakes and mounting controversy, Freeman continued performing lobotomies irresponsibly. Freeman's disregard for scientific rigor and safety led to dangerous results for many patients.
Because to do a scientific study, he should have set up a lobotomy group and a control group.
Instead, he skipped the need for a control group and relied on the procedure alone. He even dismissed emerging treatments like antipsychotic drugs to keep performing lobotomies. His methods left a trail of suffering and death, yet he faced little professional consequence. The legacy of lobotomies is a dark chapter in the history of medicine. What was once considered a groundbreaking procedure is now seen as a cruel, inhumane practice that destroyed countless lives. The goal of helping those with mental health issues became a tragic reminder of how the medical field can sometimes go astray when ethical standards are ignored and scientific evidence is disregarded. You can check out more about Freeman's practice by watching my segment on this topic on season 1 on the History Channel's program, The Unbelievable with Dan Aykroyd. Much like Freeman's reckless approach to lobotomies, attempts to defy nature can sometimes backfire. In extreme sports, athletes like Dwayne Weston push the limits of human capability. But even with careful preparation and advanced equipment, things can still go wrong. As when Weston's parachute failed to open during a wingsuit dive, leading to a tragic outcome. Dwayne Weston was a highly skilled wingsuit skydiver, but during one of his dives, a tragic event unfolded. As he hurtled towards the ground at high speed, he attempted to slow his descent by spreading his arms to increase drag. This is a common technique for wingsuit divers, but as his lats, those large muscles in the back, screamed in pain and his lower back stretched to its limit, the forces at play were far beyond what the human body is built to handle. When we talk about impact at high speeds like this, we're dealing with forces the body simply can't absorb. Bones, for example, aren't very elastic. They're designed to support your body and absorb some shock, but at 120 miles per hour, they're more likely to break or fracture or even shatter. So as Dwayne was descending, the damage was almost inevitable.
And I just look down and I see that I'm covered in blood. Whoa. And I look over and I see a severed leg lying on the ground. And I'm just like...
If it were just his limbs, there might have been a chance for recovery. But the real danger lies in the vital organs that the rib cage and the skull protect. The rib cage shields the heart and lungs, while the skull safeguards the brain. At those speeds, the force of impact is enough to crush bone. And when that happens, the organs inside, especially the brain, are at extreme risk. The brain is particularly vulnerable because it's soft and delicate, and when jolted or impacted, it can suffer severe trauma that often leads to immediate fatality. That is, if it even remains intact. So when Dwayne hit the bridge, the body's natural protective structures were overwhelmed by the sheer force, and unfortunately, there was no way for the body to absorb that impact in a survivable manner. While the body is incredibly durable, this tragic death, along with the others covered today, highlight just how fragile it can be when exposed to forces beyond its design limits. And although I don't want to be too macabre, these tragic events show us that while there are much more common causes of mortality, there are probably a whole bunch of ways to punch out that you have never even considered. So, on that note, to try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days and score 20% off an annual subscription, visit brilliant.org/Dr. Chris Raynor or scan the QR code on screen. If you found anything in this video educational, then all I would ask is that you leave a comment and give it a big thumbs up to feed the algorithm. This will help us to grow the channel so that we can create more engaging videos about human anatomy and physiology for you. If you didn't like the video, that's okay. Be sure to let me know why in the comment section down below. Your comment just might help us to make our videos better for you in the future. We are working towards our goal of 1 million subs, and we would love to have you with us when we get there. Don't forget to follow my gym, Human 2.0 Fitness, for free right here on YouTube, where we post content that helps you move better and prevent injury. Or its sister channel, Human at Home, where we show you how to be healthy in the place where you live. Otherwise, as always, that's been a word from Dr. Chris, not your everyday ortho, where we see one, do one, teach one. Oh yeah, don't forget, best of the holiday season to you if you celebrate it.